Hello everyone, and thank you for your interest in my presentation. My name is Holly McAllister, and I've recently completed a Bachelor of Speech and Language Pathology with Integrated Honours at Charles Sturt University in Albury, Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional owners of the land on which I have studied and pay my respect to elders past and present. So my honours project looked at Fiji English speech sound acquisition and speech sound disorders in multilingual Fijian children. Today I'll be focusing on the first aspect of this project and its relevance for speech language pathologists and early childhood educators. So when we're learning a language, one of the things we need to learn is how to produce the sounds in that language. This is known in the speech language pathology profession as speech sound acquisition. It plays an important role in assessment, diagnosis, and intervention planning for speech sound disorders in children. It's a gradual process, as you can see from this diagram from McLeod and Crow's 2018 study on speech sound acquisition in 27 languages, which included 15 studies of English speech sound acquisition. So monolingual English speaking children acquire the majority of sounds in English by the age of 5, but as you can see, there are a number of sounds that are acquired much earlier than that. Some information is available on speech sound acquisition for languages other than English. However, few studies have been published, which includes acquisition data for multilingual children. This is despite the fact that the majority of the world's population are multilingual. They are able to functionally produce and/or understand 2 or more languages in any modality: reading, writing, speaking, listening, or signing. Most will also have typical speech acquisition. Speaking more than one language can influence speech sound acquisition, particularly if the languages being learned do not share some sounds or features. Because of this, it's important for a speech language pathologist, or SLP, to have knowledge of the sounds and structure of a child's languages to hypothesize how they may influence production in another language, such as English. This is known as cross-linguistic transfer. So my project focused on Fiji English. Fiji is made up of more than 300 islands and is located northeast of Australia in the South Pacific Ocean. Indigenous Fijians, or Italki, make up more than half of the country's total population and speak more than 300 community dialects of Fijian. Due to British colonialism, a standard dialect of Fijian, called Bowen or Italki, was adopted as the institutional language. The second largest cultural group in Fiji are Indo-Fijians, who are descendants of Northern Indian peoples brought to Fiji by the British. The institutional language used is Standard Hindi. However, the language spoken by this group is Fiji Hindi, which borrows features from Northern Indian languages, Fijian and English. The third institutional language, English, was adopted as a lingua franca and is mostly used in government, media, and education. Fiji education policy states that from years 1 to 3, children are taught in their home languages. From year 4, English becomes the main language of school instruction. So the dialect of English spoken by Fijians from all linguistic backgrounds is known as Fiji English. There are 5 main dialects of Fiji English, described based on the speaker's first and dominant language. One of these is Fijian Fiji English, or FFE. Another is Fiji Hindi Fiji English, or FHFE. These diagrams from Hoff, McLeod and Garrity's 2016 article on Fiji English show the sounds that are and are not shared between the first language, Standard Australian English dialect, and the dialect of Fiji English. As you can see, there are a number of sounds which are used in Standard Fijian and Fiji Hindi, which are unique to those languages. You can see in the overlap between the English dialect circles that there are some sounds which are shared by the dialects that are not found in the first languages. For an adult speaker of FFE, for example, this might materialise as production of S instead of Z. For an FHFE speaker, they might say S instead of Sh. So looking at speech sound acquisition, the potential impact of multilingualism on this acquisition and the 2 Fiji English dialects, my first research question was, what is the pattern of English language speech sound acquisition for typically developing Fijian school-age children from different first language backgrounds? I analysed data from school students that was originally collected for Hof's 2017 PhD project titled Supporting Fijian Children's Communication. Information from caregivers on the languages spoken by the children and within the household revealed the multilingual nature of Fiji. For example, the majority of students were consistently exposed to 2 or more languages in the home. For the purpose of this study aim, 72 students were identified as being speakers of either FFE or FHFE. This was based on caregiver-reported dominant primary and additional languages in the home. The Diagnostic Evaluation of Articulation and Phonology, or DEEP assessment, was used to collect samples of 80 words, which sampled all English language consonants across multiple word positions. The samples were transcribed online by Dr. Hof and recorded for reliability measurements. The interjudge reliability rating conducted between Dr. Hof and myself satisfied Schreiberg and Loft's acceptable agreement level of more than 85%, so I began the deeper analysis. Consonant sounds were given a numeric code and the transcriptions were entered into a Microsoft Excel worksheet purpose-built for this analysis by McLeod and Burden's VH speech team, which I adapted for Fiji English. The data from these worksheets was then transferred into SPSS statistics to calculate the percentage of consonants correct for acquisition. Analysis was conducted by dialect and with the participants divided into the age groups that you can see on the slide here. Analysis was based on the Children's Independent and Relational Phonological Analysis tool, or CHIRPA, developed by Elise Baker in 2017. Acquisition of consonants was based on Hua and Dodd's 2006 criteria, that the sound has been acquired when 90% of the students correctly produce that sound at least once in the sample. As you can see, many of the sounds were acquired by the youngest age group across dialects. This lines up with the McLeod and Crowe diagram for sounds acquired in the early years. Some of the later sounds to be acquired by monolingual English-speaking children, aged 5 to 6, were zh, and the 2 th sounds. As you can see, the sound was acquired by the age of 9-6 across both dialect groups. Similarly, the 2 th sounds were acquired by older children, with the FHFE speaking children acquiring the voiced th sound slightly later than the FFE speaking children. When assessing a child for a speech sound disorder, SLPs will look at the percentage of consonants the child has produced correctly when compared to an adult target. On this slide, you can see the percentage of Standard Australian English consonants correct in light blue and the percentage of Fiji English consonants correct in dark blue for both of the year groups. As you can see, the percentage of consonants correct for Fiji English is much higher for both Year 1 and Year 4 students compared to Standard Australian English consonants correct. This means that more of the children's consonants were marked as correct when their dialect was considered, compared to the outside dialect of Standard Australian English. Percentage of consonants correct can also be an indicator of how well a child can be understood by familiar and unfamiliar listeners. The difference in the percentage of consonants correct between Year 1 and Year 4 students for Fiji English was found to be statistically significant with a large effect size. This indicates a strong positive relationship between speech sound acquisition, percentage of Fiji English consonants correct, and a child's age for these multilingual Fijian children. Previous research with multilingual children and children who speak non-standard dialects of English have shown the impact that home languages can have on English speech sound acquisition. The results of this research project show that the sound inventories and features of Fijian and Fiji Hindi have an impact on the acquisition of Fiji English speech sounds. This is particularly for some of the sounds which were not shared between the languages and English, and for some of those later acquired sounds. The prevalence of speech sound disorders is similar in multilingual and monolingual children. However, multilingual children are more likely to be over or underrepresented on an SLP's clinical caseload. This is due in part to the scarcity of data available for multilingual populations for the SLP to be able to accurately identify dialectal difference versus speech sound error. This research will provide SLPs with the knowledge of the impact of Fijian or Fiji Hindi on the production of Fiji English. This will aid in the provision of culturally safe diagnosis and intervention planning for speech sound disorders with these children. So in my research project, I also looked at the acquisition of other English language features, such as consonant clusters. And I also looked at the impact of dialect on the identification and severity of speech sound disorders for these children. As this participant group was relatively small and from one urban school in Fiji, further research is needed to be able to generalise the results of this research project to the general population of FFE and SHFE speaking children. Other areas of future research would include the clinical application of this knowledge for a culturally responsive and appropriate intervention with Fijian children who have speech sound disorders, as well as gathering similar data for other Fijian languages, Fiji English dialects, and age groups. So my take-home message today is that early childhood educators often play an integral role in referring and providing intervention for children who have communication difficulties or disorders. For some children, concerns about their speech sound development or how well they can be understood by unfamiliar adults or by their peers may first be raised by their teacher. Therefore, knowledge of how children develop is important for early childhood educators when considering whether or not a child needs to be referred for a speech pathology assessment. It is as important for early childhood educators to be aware of how multilingual children's languages may influence their production of the other languages they speak as it is for SLPs. Consideration of a child's cultural and linguistic background and knowledge of the dialects of the languages they speak is important for the provision of culturally safe and responsive care for these children. I'd like to take a moment to thank the children, their teachers and caregivers who participated in this research project, and to thank you all for your interest in my presentation today.